Before we get started, I just want to introduce everybody and give a little bit of a bio, because I think we're really lucky that we have 3 editors who have a variety of experiences between them. And so I think they come to this question with different perspectives and different ideas. So we'll find out where they differ and also where they overlap. I'll start on the end with Per. Per Kirkegaard is one of the most established editors in the Danish film industry. He's edited numerous critically acclaimed documentaries and narrative features. And his credits include Borg versus McEnroe, Chuck Norris versus Communism. There's a theme there. Does it repeat elsewhere in your biography? Shadow World, Armadillo, for which he won the Emmy for Best Editing of a Long Format Documentary, and TPBAFK, The Pirate Bay Away from the Keyboard, which premiered at Berlin. And next, we have Toby Shimin. Sorry, I had to kind of piece this together from the internet, all these. Oh, did I lose yours?
That's okay.
No, it's not okay. Hold on. There it is. There it is. Toby began her film career as a sound editor, and she switched to picture editing in 1988 when she cut The Children's Storefront, which was nominated for an Academy Award. Not bad, right out of the gate. Since then, she's edited numerous films that have premiered at Sundance, including How to Dance in Ohio, which won a Peabody Award, A Leap of Faith, Martha and Ethel, Miss America, Everything's Cool, and the Sundance Award-winning films Out of the Past and Buck, which was also shortlisted for an Academy Award. In 2017, she received the Editing Award at Woodstock Film Festival for HBO's 32 Pills, My Sister's Suicide, and her most recent film, Ernie and Joe, which we'll be talking about today, premiered at South by Southwest earlier this year. And finally, we have Alla Kovgan. She was born in Moscow. She's divided her time between Europe and the US. She has 2 decades of experience working in dance and film on screen, VR, and in theater, as well as a strong record as a documentary writer-editor. Her film Nora was at over 120 film festivals, received 30 awards. And in the last decade, she co-directed, co-wrote, and edited on Emmy-nominated Traces of the Trade and Movement Revolution Africa. She also edited My Perestroika, and her first VR piece with Finnish music duo Puhti, Devil's Lungs, won numerous awards, including Grand Prix at Vienna Shorts Festival. And that made her an artist in residence at Vienna's Museum Quarter 21 in 2019. So, thanks for bearing with that. As you can see, they've done all kinds of things. So we're going to start by talking about character by just talking a little bit about what we think character is as a place to start. David Mamet said, and this may not have been his original idea, but that character is a sum of a person's actions and choices. I don't know if that helps us in our discussion here, but if it does, use it, and if it doesn't, tell us why. So we're also, just a little preamble, we're going to be talking about how we can think of character as documentary filmmakers, how it can be helpful to us while we're making films, what is character, how do you create it, and within all that, what are the challenges to creating compelling characters that draw us in and help tell a fascinating story. Would anyone like to start by talking about what they think character is?
I can try. Thank you for coming. What is character? Yeah, it's of course it's a person. It's a human being that's trying to get through life. And in documentary, it's really so important to find the moments in the film, in the footage, to realize or to find out who that person is. So my approach to dealing with what kind of character I have when I do a documentary, it is like, going into what I call the private rooms, the private moments with the character, where I try to look at the character, where I try to find out who the character really are when they are alone, when nobody is watching on them. So, because that is where I really start to dislike or like the character, to find out where to go with the character in the movie, whatever I'm constructing of structure or whatever.
I'll just jump off on that. Has anyone here seen the TV show Couples Therapy? Yeah? Well, there's, whether you have or not, I was just thinking about this on the train in, there is a scene where the therapist is talking to the couple, and the woman of the couple, I think her name is Elaine, is talking about her childhood, and she's just like reporting. She's in this reporting mode. You know, this happened, and I grew up here, and then I've been and this happened, and then I married this guy, and he was abusive, and I would wake up every morning, and he would punch me in the face, and the therapist goes, "Wait, stop." And I feel like that, to me, as an editor, is a little bit like what you were saying. There's this moment you're watching, whether it's, you know, like you're saying, dance can be a character, but a person in this kind of reporting mode. And then there's something that happens on screen that's like the trigger of something that you want to follow. So to me, that's at least the beginning of character.
Can I just add something to that? Because that's a very good example. Because in the film that I did about Imelda Marcos for Lauren Greenfield, we have a moment, we have a scene in the film where there was an interview, and Imelda does one of her very famous mind slips. The interviewer asking about something, and Imelda is telling another story. And she begins telling a story about the past, that she lost her mom when she was a kid. So she starts the sentence like this: "When I lost my money," instead of mother.
Well, it's interesting. I was just thinking about, Ricky Leacock. He made a film once going to make a film about Ku Klux Klan. And he went in there and he was said something like, well, I was trying to understand how they were taking, this idea of sort of getting into somebody's mind, entering from all possible sides without prejudice or preconception. So I think as editors, and again what you're saying, if we're making a film about people, which I'd like to kind of also push a bit, the person is just multifaceted kind of being, right? And we are trying to sort of, I always find a way to get at the same level, whoever they are, whether they are a king or a child, and try to engage with them and just really understand that how they're taking inside, and that becomes an entry into constructing what are we about. Now, with my cases, I used to edit a lot with and had films with a lot of people as characters, but this recently, as I'm sort of very much interested in the artists, I started realizing that their work, as much as characters they are, and sometimes there's no difference between the person and what they do, actually. And so, in a lot of films I've seen about artists, they're like biopics, and they're about artists as people. You understand how they came to do art, but you never actually know what the art is. You're supposed to go somewhere. So. This recently, I've been into this kind of quest of making work of a character, making work of an artist a character, that has the same weight as the artist himself, and then sort of discovering the artist through the work. So that's the film I just edited called Cunningham. It's in 3D, which is a whole other nightmare. But that was just an interesting thing, is that to start not from the character who he is, but from what they do, and then discover that. So that was the thing.
So in Cunningham, and this is going to be a good point to show the clip, did you start, you said it was a 7-year effort and process. Did you start out knowing I'm going to make a film where the work is the central through line, really, and then his life will be really secondary to that?
Right, so it actually came from idea 3D and trying to translate his ideas into cinema, right? So it started from the work, and then the work led me to the artist. So actually, I never wanted to make a film about Murski. And he's a kind of choreographer where you have 16 people going in different directions. You can make a single shot. It's insanity, basically. And he's not like a sympathetic, what I've heard, character. So how do you actually enter the world and try to understand? The best way was through the work. So that's all started from the work and the idea of translating his ideas and then discovering him. And actually I try not to know a lot before first I started with figuring out all the work and then seeing what the work tells me and then finding and matching what happens in life while he was making it.
From what I remember, for the most part, except at the beginning maybe, and I could be totally wrong, it's there's a chronology to it. We go through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. We get to see the work start developing. Was there... Did you do? But maybe at the beginning, what the first dance you start in is probably not first chronologically. Is that right?
Well, it's quite early.
It's still early, but
44, yeah.
But you must have made a decision to use that piece first for some reason that had to do with giving us a point in to the work.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's a kind of bigger question. We're getting into structure, right? I mean, time structure is 30 years in this particular film, and there can be a day structure, a week structure, 5-hour structure, whatever structures are. So this was particularly 30 years structure, and it was in chronological order, work-wise, pretty much. So the work went in chronological order, but the events in his life didn't. So it was a kind of a conversation of trying to... But I mean, before we even go to the clip, I mean, the character can be a city. I mean, I think about city symphonies. I mean, Vertov, 1929, that's Men with a Movie Camera, or Godfrey Reggio, Kainis Katse, or there are different ways we can go thinking about characters, as people, I mean, there's an elephant queen here. I mean, what's up with the elephants? There's always a kind of a relationships we build as editors, trying to understand how to sort of construct whoever the character is, and there are different principles, of course, whether it's psychological principles or it's about rhythm and finding the sort of almost like musical phrases with Men with a Movie Camera or something like that. So it's always a kind of a different approach, depending on who character is.
Can we show the clip now, do you think? Okay. Walk us, tee up this clip.
Right.
Happens in the film.
With Cunningham, it's very difficult. Also, nobody likes dance, really. So, just so you know, I'm very aware of that. But especially on screen, it's like a disaster anyway. But sorry, but I mean.
Don't tell Magnolia Pictures who's distributing
No, they're great. I mean, hopefully we did a good job.
Right.
So that's why they're here. But we are here for that matter. The dance and film sort of they have affinity. Contemporary dance and film were born at the same time. And the cinema was invented to capture action. It's best at making images and action. It's not really talking is a secondary thing that came, of course, much later. So, this clip comes right at the beginning of the film, and we have to set up several things: who is it about, what's happening, how we're going to do it, and also introduce different tonalities about the person and the work. So I think we just show it. It's right at the beginning, so I think that can be good too, and then we can chat a bit. Thank you. So do we want to ask?
Well, I want to comment that I love how the voiceover, the archival material, in conjunction the way you've edited it with the visuals, encourage us to lean forward and pay so much attention to what they're doing, and really draws me in, like you said, maybe as somebody who's not a dance fan, sure, to develop an appreciation for it, and his work, like you say, as a character. So this is my introduction to this work, and I'm going to begin a journey with it, and I think it's really effective at doing that. Did you? Alla told me before we started that she was planning it for 7 years and then had 2 weeks to shoot all the dance pieces in this. Had you constructed somewhat of a rough cut or ideas of where the archival material was going to happen with the dances?
So very interesting, very different from my other experiences editing. Usually, you're as a director and you discover the story through the material. I mean, the material tells you, and we come usually when there's a lot shot, and we usually have hundreds of hours of footage, and we start finding it. Now, this film was 100% scripted, so I had to actually do all the work of trying to understand what it is before I even touched the camera, because it's 3D film. It's a very different process. But everything I wrote, so there's a written script, but I had for every little phrase that Cunningham said, or the other people that appear in the film, I had maybe 15 versions of archival material variations. It's very important. They were all different in tone. Like in here you have 3 tonalities for me. You have a tonality of his just giving an interview, telling us, everyone. It's tonality 1. Then he answers questions. Now there's so many questions. They were asked questions all the time. John Cage, Rauschenberg, all the time. There were interviewers, and those interviewers actually become part of the film. This is the first time we set it up with the interviewer asked the question. Now they're from different times, just by the sound, by the nature of the sound, but it's just questions, So that's another, and those are radio interviews actually, which is a different tonality again. And then there's a third tonality which nobody knew, that he actually sat in a hotel room and he was recording ideas that he had in a hotel room. Now, nobody knew that, even a lot of Cunningham experts that just found that. And again, he did multiple times, so I had all these different versions, how he did it. So for every single little sort of excerpt of sound, we had a bunch of different things that we could use. So for the script, I chose one because I had to, right? So I was thinking, okay, well, that's what's going to go there. But when I was editing, I brought up all of them again. And I had to choose again because I didn't know how this is going to work. So it's kind of interesting when you write it, you kind of go through sort of almost like a fiction process, even the fiction film process, although you work with the real material, with the documentary elements, But when you edit, you completely go through documentary process, and that actually helped me a lot because I could. All the experience editing, and actually on this film I was supposed to have an editor who said he cannot do that. He said, yeah, I should edit myself. He would just go crazy, So, but it has to do with dance and the whole thing. So, but anyway, so it was an interesting thing, just sort of having options with different tonalities, and then trying to almost choreograph the journey of discovering. When do you give him a personal voice? When you have him react to a question? And then how is it all going to be with dance? And also, of course, the huge thing is the sound, because Schmeer's choreographed without music. So until we meet John Cage, there's no music, pretty much, in terms of his work. So I try to make you watch, right? Because it's for the work. I try to make you watch. And as you watch, you hopefully hear better, what he's saying.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next film, the next clip. So this is going to be from Ernie and Joe, which Toby edited. And I was going to say this is a more traditional character-driven film, although it's, I'd say, not as traditional as we might think because, well, tell us what the film's about, and then we can talk a little more.
Okay. Ernie and Joe are 2 Texas police officers, law enforcement officers. And one of them, Ernie, pioneered a project in the San Antonio Police Department, which was creating a mental health unit to deal with what ends up being most of their 911 calls, which is somebody in an emotional crisis. And the director very much wanted to highlight the work and how important this work was. And she and I are very much on the same page in that the best way to bring an audience into caring about an issue or the work that people are doing is to sort of fall in love with a character or a few characters. So the film follows them as they're doing this very intense work. But I think what you were alluding to is nothing, things happen. I was about to say nothing really happens, but very dramatic things happen along the way, but there was not a clear structure. we weren't starting at point A, and we knew we had to go to point B. So the structure really relied on the character development of these two guys.
Which is an exciting challenge for many reasons, but one is there's not a chronology that you're going to have to follow. You had a lot of flexibility on where you put scenes and what you included. And I think the clips, we're going to show 2 clips, and I think those are going to illustrate that. Do you want to set them up with the challenge that was presented to you and how these illustrate a solution to it?
I've been thinking since our first conversation. I actually had 2 big challenges with this film in terms of developing character and getting people to care. After I cut a couple of scenes and I showed them, there are probably like 10 people in this room who I showed them to because I was so excited about this film, and everyone said, I can't tell them apart. They look exactly alike. So that's kind of a superficial problem, but in terms of creating the film, it was like, when do we break away from introducing what they do and who these 2 guys are to, okay, let's take a deeper dive into one character versus the other, so that the audience will really start to, okay, I can tell them apart. I can see through their personalities and their stories how different they actually are. And the second problem is, and this is the first time it's happened to me, as I started screening the first couple of shoots, I fell madly in love with both of them. So I was like, what happens often with a director, they come to an editor and they're so in love with the characters in the film, and then you as an editor look at the footage and you're kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah. This time I was like, from frame 1, I loved them so much I kind of lost perspective. And there was actually, I remember one scene which happens later in the film, it's not going to be in here, but it's of one of these characters, and he's just driving and talking. And my associate editor, Joy Reed, who I think is here, came over, and I was like, you got to see this, just raw footage. You got to see this. Isn't he amazing? And we watched maybe 10 minutes, and she's like, it's okay. I don't really see what you're seeing. So that was a challenge. Like, how do I actually step back, take off the, rosy glasses, and start to dig into what are the elements that start to make an audience care? So this first clip is very short, and it's toward the beginning of the film, and it just sort of presents them doing a training session, which is part of the work they do. They're not only out on patrol, but they train other first responders. So this is just to give the audience like an idea of what they do in a very short amount of time. And you'll see how much they look alike. I don't think they look alike at all, but so this is toward the beginning. There was a little more backstory about how this unit came to be, and you see them on the job handling different calls. And then there felt a time, I didn't actually clock the exact time, it's maybe 15 minutes in. It's like, okay, let's now start to really care. Like, I care about the work, but an audience isn't going to go along for a 90-minute film if it's kind of just, the same tone. You have to kind of start going vertically deep. And I wanted to start with Joe's personal backstory because this is going to sound terrible, but I think if there are enough editors in the room, you'll get it. When you hear, like I heard that Joe was suffering from PTSD from his time in the Marines, and although that's really awful, I'm like, yes! PTSD, something to care about. So I thought that would be a good place to start exploring his story. And in terms of just like a person, in an interview telling a story, and what I was talking about before, just this like reporting mode, if there's a moment, and this happens in this clip, where Joe starts, you can tell he's actually like reliving it in his head. And it's a very subtle moment, but I feel like when that happens on screen, you go from that reporting mode into, I can feel what this person is feeling and I'm along with them. So I saw that in this interview, even though it's a very, classic talking head, locked off shot. It's not particularly beautiful at all, but this happens in the moment of his storytelling. So I guess we should look at this.
It's good.
And just one note on this, that after we had a rough cut screening where this scene was in the right place, nobody had that confusion anymore. They knew exactly who was who. And I thought that was just psychologically so interesting.
We're going to have to move on to Per. So Per is going to share 2 clips with us. The first one's going to be from The Cave. And I have a question. In developing character in The Cave, the first one is, was Dr. Amani the main character in the film now? Was she always, did you go in knowing that she was going to be the main character?
Yeah,
Yeah.
when I came on board in the editing, we knew that, but the shooting has been going on. In this film, I think Firas was shooting for more than 3 years, and he had 2 different teams in Syria, one in El Ghouta and then one in Idlib, north of Syria, and he was not sure that moment which of the doctors in those 2 different locations that he was going to have in the movie. But when I came on board in the editing process, he was totally clear about what to do and who was the main character in the film.
And let's let the audience know a little bit about what The Cave is about.
Yes, The Cave is a film about a Syrian underground hospital, and it's and the film is following this female doctor, Dr. Amani, which have a team of doctors, and she's actually the first leader of a hospital in Syria. So it's quite interesting and very powerful portrait of this fantastic, heroic female doctor in this really tough situation where dead children is coming in and people without limbs and tough decision of saying this person is not able to survive and move on to the next one that probably have a chance to survive. It's a very devastating film, but in the developing of the film, we realized that the audience need to have some breaks from the horror that we show in the movie. So we made what you can call a kind of emotional island where you just space out time and just be with the characters without thinking about moving on in the storyline. So that is my first clip that I'm going to show you. It's a moment, 40 minutes into the movie, where we see Dr. Amani talking with a girl in the hospital.
Go ahead and show that.
And I think this is also, when I go back to what I said in the beginning, the private moments, the private rooms with the character. This is an example. She's not alone. I know that. Don't take it so literary. But she's very vulnerable here. She's really very honest about who she is. She's so safe in this talk with this girl, so you can really feel our main character, Dr. Amani, in this scene. And I think it's also a very powerful statement about what she believes in when she tries to teach the little girl and telling what is important in her life. And it's important that she's a girl, that she has to believe in herself and become something important in the life. I just want to add that.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny watching this out of context. The whole film is so heavy, but in the course of the film, this actually feels like, I don't want to say a lighter moment, but it's a break from the daily carnage coming into the hospital. And in the context, it is a little bit of a break, but it goes so deep into the tragedy that these characters are experiencing. I don't want to keep moving on, but we are going to run out of time, so I'm going to move on to your next clip. So the next clip is from the Kingmaker. Can you tell the audience what that's about?
Yeah, just want to add something.
Yeah.
Because this is an observational film. There's no interview in this film, and it is structured like, we come into the film, we see how horrifying the situation is with the daily bombings and people coming in. And we have those kind of islands in the film where we see them doing their daily life, having breaks from all the troubles, just being colleagues, being friends, having fun, make celebration of birthdays and so on, like we all do. So we can get into that and keep ourselves into that moment in the film. So that's very important. And then if we move on to The Kingmaker, about Imelda Marcos, and it's a film that Lauren Greenfield did. The other film is by Firas Fayed, and it's a totally other film in the sense of instead of having a hero here. Oh, Lauren is there. Hi, Lauren. Instead of having a hero, we have a kind of villain as a main character in our film, and opposite in the cave where we could find those moments where there was this kind of we could show the real person behind, when she's not doing her doctor things, you could feel her as a human being. The opposite was in the Kingmaker. It was like it was difficult to find the cracks in to see who Imelda really was in the film, and that's so important for us when we did that. It's about Imelda Marcos, and it's a kind of very long story about coming back. She's been around for more than 50 years trying to regain the power of being the first lady again in the Philippines. So let's watch this clip where we are trying to find out if it's possible to find the cracks into this old lady that nobody maybe takes too serious, but let's look at it.
And how far into the film is this one?
This is about 48 minutes into the film. Yeah, I think it's a quite good clip illustrating the challenge that Lauren and I had in the editing with this character. She's totally the same during the film. So we had to figure out a system, or a kind of structuring this character. Every time she tried to say something, we know it's a lie. It's a lie. She's unreliable. There's no doubt about that. So we needed to have something that we believed in could frame that lie, so everybody was sure about that. So the system in the film is that we have what we call the choir of the truth teller. That is the activist that had been fought the Marcos regime for many years. It was from the 60s to the 80s, 1986, when they were in power and had that dictatorship. So we use those, the very powerful activists, to frame the story about the lie that she's always provided us with. In her way, trying to gain power again in the Philippines, using all the $10 billion that Marcos stole when they were leaving the country in '86.
So that story is a complex one. The film gets into a lot of the history of the Philippines and the ins and outs and the politics and the ups and downs of politicians and their family. That's complex, but it sounds like Imelda herself, as a person, is not very complex.
Yeah, I think you're right. She's complex, but to get it out, it's finding those cracks into the mind of her. And this is an example of that, where she gets self-pity about that the world is against her, and the other example was the other one I gave about losing your mother when you're a little kid, losing your money when you're a kid instead. So it's like she's always on that quest for getting back in power and trying to be in control in the film.
speaking of being in control, this scene illustrates a technique that you use a few times in the film where she's controlling where they're putting the statues. And there's also another scene where she's asking if her belly, if she looks fat or if her belly's showing, and another where she's telling her assistants where to put stuff. At what point in the process did you realize you wanted to use that kind of material? Or
the one about the belly, and Lauren says, but it's in the opening of the film. It's in the kind of title sequence where Lauren directing her, and it's a little bit off camera. It's like Imelda is probably not aware of the camera is running because she's directing the maids. She have a lot of maids around her all the time, trying to do. She's asking them to say, where do I have to sit, and is my belly do my belly looks okay, and where to look, and so on. And then Lauren asks her, look here, when Lauren is trying to take a photo of her, and then she looks the complete other way. It's like, it's happened all the time. And that was something that came quite late in the editing of the process, that we wanted to show this that she's trying to be in control. And what we tried to do in the editing was trying to take the control away from her. And that is what the film is doing later on. I can't reveal the end of the film. Act 3 is not a portrait of Imelda Marcos anymore. It's a present political story about what's really happened in the Philippines now. So we do a very big change in that Act 3. But I think it's really do the film as a fantastic thing. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll open it up for questions now. We've got about 20 more minutes. Anybody ready with a question? Sir.
Hi. So, Toby, you told us about falling in love with characters, and my question is about showing the dark side of characters sometimes. And I'll give you a very concrete situation from the editing room this week and see what you think of it. And I realize my question has an ethical dimension to it, but I'm really more interested in the practical side of what makes the film better. So, the film follows a war vet with PTSD, and we really want the audience to like him. Now, he's always very tense and very controlling, and we have a couple of scenes, observational scenes between him and his wife, where you can feel the tension in the couple's life, and they both talk about it. So I showed it to some people whose impression was that there is domestic abuse going on there. To the best of our knowledge, that's not the case. But I wouldn't want the audience to think that, because I would worry that I will take sympathy away from him. What would you do in this kind of a situation? And I realize, of course, it's totally out of context. But
Can you describe your dailies to us, and then we can? How many hours? What's in them?
Do you still have access to this?
yes.
I mean, if you don't feel like you can find it already existing in the footage, and you feel like it's really important that the audience knows for sure that this isn't occurring, perhaps there's a way you could get him to talk about it, or get his wife to talk about it. That's what I would first suggest. That may not be possible. I don't know.
Any other questions? Yes, in the white.
Yeah, hi. Is there a difference between editing for narrative as opposed to doc style that you found, or is it pretty much the same in editing technique and style?
Would describe the difference between editing fiction films and documentary films.
Yeah, you have a script. That's definitely the first thing that's different, because you're really rewriting whatever you get into the editing room when you're doing the documentary. But doing as I do scripted fiction as well. So it's like I sometimes takes what I do, what I learned from doing that, into the documentary thing. And I think that's really helped me sometimes of constructing scenes and make the definition of what is it that I really want to bring into the scene. So that they know. I know a scene has to have a turning point, and I'm using that all the time when I'm doing the documentary. I'm trying really to make that one of the key things for me when I attack a scene and try to do that first time.
But can I just jump in for a second? You just reminded me, I was talking with Judith Helfand, the director, and she has over her editing station, or where her editor is, she has something that says, just because you didn't film it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So even in documentary, she feels like there's a lot of freedom to somehow construct something that didn't happen.
I mean, I think in our case we had a script, but we went once you have the interesting about fiction, there's only so much shot. I mean, you have all these elements. You can't quite often go and do more. So you're kind of sort of strangled with elements, in a way. Because with documentary, there's always, ways, most likely, to do something differently or to find something else. So it's quite interesting because it's I find it more confining, in a way, but I don't feel like you have to adhere to the script. What you're saying, you basically, once you're in editing, you start making your movie. I mean, even though there is a script, there's a kind of blueprint, but I think the freedom of elements that you have to work with in documentary is just much. But both of them, it's a question of, in talking about characters, I mean, it's a question of finding integrity of your characters, whether they are documentary and fiction, and that's why I don't think there is kind of a boundary between fiction and non-fiction in that sense. Yeah.
Isn't it about finding an authenticity in the characters, even though it's fabricated? You're picking and choosing elements, finding 5 shots from 5 different years and putting them together and creating something out of that. And that's an exciting thing about filmmaking. I think some fiction, but so much in documentary is having all those materials to draw from, right? In some films. Any other questions? Yes.
The characters in the films presented here are larger than life and pretty incredible, and I think, merit, sustain a 90-minute film. What happens, or what do you have a strategy for when you're presented with a story, let's say, that is great, or a thing or a topic that's hanging on main characters that are less than compelling, and what do you do? What do you do to build them? What strategies do you use for that?
Did everybody hear it? No. The characters in these films seem big and strong and capable of supporting feature film. But what happens when you're working on a project you've already said yes to, I guess, and the story is very strong, but maybe the characters aren't as large as the ones in this film, or that you have strategies on addressing that in the edit?
Don't say yes.
Yeah, that's actually my answer. I now, before I come on board a film, ask to sit with the footage, hopefully the director and the footage, for a day, and make sure, even if the story isn't clear, that there's a strong character or set of characters, because I don't know what I would cry, and I don't think I'd be able to work on that.
What if you're not seeing it, though? What if there is something there that you're maybe, I'm
Yeah.
wondering if maybe there's just a subtlety that...
Are there times where you don't see maybe haven't yet seen the subtleties in the characters that the story you're telling, or
is it if you don't see it right away, it's just not there?
if you don't see it right away, is it just not there? How do you trust yourself? Is it experience?
I mean, I just keep thinking about, coming from experimental film world, I think you can make a movie out of anything, honestly. No, seriously. I mean, people, I don't know, what's Kosakovsky looked outside and made a film about people drilling a hole, and, it's not... I mean,
How many people here have seen that film?
A lot, actually.
Oh, nobody
A
here,
huge
I don't
amount.
It's on my list, though. It's on my queue.
It's called Tisha, yeah. I mean, I mean, there's in experimental film, there's all kinds of people who come in and say, well, you can just do it, which I do believe. I mean, because, you still have a lot of cinematic tools, I mean, that you can actually employ to figure it out, but you'll have to write it. And you kind of have to then construct what you want to say, or the director, in that case, if you're an editor, the director want to say, or like collaborate with them to be able to figure out what can you do with what you've got. So I think it's not impossible. It's just not going to be maybe a character-driven film. You just have to kind of look at it from a different perspective, and the characters become an element, like a part of the film, but you just have to figure out with the director what the film is about, and then I think it's possible. I just think, it's challenging if you don't have strong, characters, but it's not impossible.
And I think so. Yeah, that's right. But my own experience says, like, as you said, you can make anything out of documentary footage, because it's just to find the way and get in there and be honest about what you have in front of you. And it's of course sometimes you have to say, okay, it's not possible, but you shouldn't come to that point. You shouldn't say yes to a film where you have that. It's so important for you to go into it and believe in it and stay until the end, even if it's cost a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Just ask Lauren. I went to LA for more than 2 years working with Lauren.
Per and Alla, we heard from the answer from Toby on this, but do you have strategies when you're interviewing or considering jobs, or a director's considering hiring you, on how do you assess? What is the best way for you to assess whether or not it's a job that you want to take on?
It's meeting the director. It's absolutely trying to find out if it's possible to work with the director and feel like there's a kind of understanding about who I am and who the director is. It's so important in editing. I think dialogue is all. Dialogue is the most important. Sometimes you don't care about the footage. It's the dialogue. You have to be on the same road doing the film, and that's really, really most important. And sometimes it's probably not the world's best film, but it can be a fantastic experience to make that film with the director.
I think I call it wavelength. You're on the same wavelength, sort of, because you're gonna spend a lot of time together. And sometimes what happens is your sensibilities can be completely different. But it doesn't mean that you don't kind of work together. You have to find some common ground. You have to, and that's actually quite instinctual. I mean, yes, of course, we have to look at I feel like we have to see what it is about. I mean, I think for me it's very important, what it is about, and whether I care about it. Because now I'm more and more direct in writing myself. So, like, if I have an editing work, I try to just like, okay, do I care about this to spend the next X amount of months or years, for that matter, to be together. But I think there needs to be I think it's more instinctual, but also it's the interest in the subject and how the sensibilities are going to play out. That's kind of have to feel that out.
I also, one last thing. It's so important to challenge yourself as an editor. It's so important that you don't get typecasted. Sure. So you have to be aware of to survive and evolve in the direction of taking new chances, go with projects that you probably never thought you were going to do. That's the most important. That's keep me alive as an editor.
I'm just thinking about this also from the perspective of somebody who's just trying to get a foothold as an editor, trying to maybe move from assistant editing to be an editor. And lots of times when you're in that position, you don't have a lot of choices. So sometimes you have to say yes, maybe even to a project that you're not sure about, and you're hoping that it's going to work out. But this is the best thing in front of you. Do it. Alla says.
I mean, the only way to do it is to do it. I mean, there's no other way. I mean, you have to keep going. If you say no to things, nothing is possible. You have to say yes to things, I think.
Other questions? Sir.
Yeah, this is for Per. It's about, people say that the film is the director's film, but the editor assembles the film. With Imelda, you were talking about her
desire to control. Ultimately, you all were taking the control from her. Was that the director's choice, or ultimately was it what you did in editing that took that control back, or was it collaborative?
It was definitely a dialogue and a collaborative work together with Lauren Greenfield. So it was like we struggled a lot with how to tell this story. That was really, really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why we spent nearly 2 years of editing this film, because it was so difficult to find the way to take the control back from the film. And it was not until that we somehow changed the original title into the new one, The Kingmaker, instead of Fantasy Island. So it was really there that we gained the control back over the film.
Sir.
So you're heading into post. You have all this footage, hopefully with a lot of those little moments that are very revealing of a character. How do you then go to figure out what comes first and what you reveal first and then you reveal next? And with the instance of Kingmaker, you start with Imelda very much in her mindset and her thought process about the past. But then you kind of go off into other perspectives which kind of take you on another journey, in another perspective. So how do you decide in which order to reveal certain details about a character?
Did everybody hear that? No, it's a question about structure. How do you decide when you start the post-production process? How do you decide what order you're going to tell the story or the scenes?
Specifically about building the character.
How do you build character in terms of structure? Where do you start? Along that lines, I was going to ask about simply screening the footage and how much you have an eye towards character, how much you have an eye towards plot. Does that also fall in line with your question?
Yeah, it's a good question. In this case, I think that we saw a lot of footage before we did the first cut at all. I needed to know exactly what this character. She was fascinating, but she was also a megalomaniac. She was also everything that was wrong about this life, and so I needed to make some kind of string outs with the kind of question that I wanted to go into with her. And I didn't know the order at all, but I made string outs saying, this is the topic that she's talking about here. That sounds interesting, but how can I attack it? Because I don't want her to take control and just having her voice in that. I needed to have somebody else to challenge that truth in that whatever story she was telling about. So I did a lot of string outs with category of questions and so on. And in this case, we had 4 interviews made over 4 years. So there was so many interviews. Just bring them in, and you will find whatever question that was interesting to challenge. So according to when we decided to change from having a kind of a little bit biopic portrait of this old lady, it was when we saw how the political situation was in the Philippines. That was so interesting, and that was really what we wanted to aim for, having, Act 3 to be a present story about what is going on now. History repeats itself. That was a part of it. And them trying to get back, using all the stolen money, get back in power. That was incredible, interesting to do.
Just in general, I think it depends on what the film is, but if you're talking about after you've made your first pass and you've pulled out selects, I often find it useful to, it's a little bit what you were saying in your string outs, make a list with index cards of questions. And it depends on the topic, what the questions are. But I keep in mind, I think it's Marshall Curry who said that at the end of every scene, you should have one of 2 things in your head. One is, I didn't know that, or what happens next? And I find it really useful to, and I think Carla was talking about this in the last panel, to go start with some scenes that you feel like they're anchor scenes. They're going to be in one form or another, but you like them. And then kind of on either side of them, think about, well, what would I want to know before this to get here? And what does this scene lead me to ask? And just start kind of building sequences like that. And I personally never try to think of the whole structure at once. I would just die. Go very slowly.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I mean, it's very difficult to start thinking as a big thing, even if you have a script, actually. I think you have to sort of come from the material, and you have to do this very tedious, in a way, process of just sorting, you know, whatever you want to call it, pooling, sorting, organizing, reorganizing, trying to build scenes. You go through this massive process until you start seeing, okay, well, this scene goes here, and maybe you're wrong, but you still need to start somewhere, you know. So then you can. There's two things. I mean, there's time is huge, right? The whole like time structures of the film, what happens. I think that's sort of also a big organizing sort of principle. Like, okay, what comes first? I mean, is it chronological or is it not? I mean, and actually at first you don't even think about it. You just have to do it. You have to keep constructing, pulling, constructing. At some point you start. I mean, the characters, they reveal things for you. You know, they kind of share things with you. You start listening to them more, but then you also don't reveal a lot of things either, but they're there, right? So how do you get that out? And how then you can play that in juxtaposition or supporting or whatever it is. So it's a kind of you're like a sculptor in a way, like, you know, someone says sculpting in time. You're basically sculpting it. At some point the movie starts emerging, right? Like what the film is. And then it becomes even more interesting. You know, there's some films that, what you were saying about those islands, you know, I feel like those things, there are moments in the films that the movie takes over itself. Like it's not driving anything. There's no more to learn something new or to find something. You're just being with the character. I think that's a precious time, because actually the movie can go on forever. You feel you're not bored, you're not tired, you're not nothing. How to get there? That's magic. I mean, sometimes you don't get there, you know, in some projects, and sometimes you do, like where they take over. That also has to do with the kind of rhythmical structures for me, always. You know, what's the rhythmical structure? What are there? Some things are repeating. Are there circular structures? You know, how does this sort of goes? It's almost like is this a spiral? I mean, you know, I actually like those kind of graphic things, you know. You're just like, okay, well, and at some point writing comes hugely helpful, you know, just sort of, because, you know, you sit in front of those machines, you know, you kind of so much in with the footage, sometimes just going away and trying to do it on paper, try to, like what you're saying, index cards or whatever way works for you, where you can start, like, I draw maps, you know, because they don't have to be all, I mean, they can be linear, can be not, like all these things. But I feel like sort of giving once you're kind of ready, giving yourself a moment and a space to actually sort of think from it from outside. I think that's a really good strategy, maybe.
Can I just add a little thing?
We're almost out of time, but one more thought, Per.
Yeah, in the cave, one of the most horrifying scenes I ever had done, it took 14 days to do. It's in Act 3 of the film, where we have a chemical attack going on. I was devastated. I was crying all the time. Some days I could only work for 1 hour. But it was so important for Firas and me that scene somehow was nailed, because if we didn't have that, we didn't have the film. We could do it whatever, but this was the criticism of what was going on in the world right now. That scene was so important for us, because it was a proof for a war crime going on there. And that was so important for us to have. So from that moment off, we were quite sure that we could structure the film. And that was really important for that film.
Well, by now, hopefully you're wondering, where can you see all these films if you haven't seen them yet? I just want to tell you real quickly, Ernie and Joe is screening again next Thursday, November 14th, at the same time in 2 theaters, 4:45 and 5. I believe it's rush tickets only, but check me on that. And it's going to premiere on, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that because we're at Film Festival, we should go see it, but on HBO on November 19th. And Cunningham will be in theaters on December 13th in this city and many others around the world eventually, right? And The Cave screens Tuesday at 10:40 in the morning. I believe that one's rush only also. And it was released in theaters last month. And it's a Nat Geo film. Is it going to be on the network at some point? Do you know?
Yeah.
To be determined.
Next year.
Next year. All right. After it wins a bunch of awards. And then The Kingmaker had 2 screenings earlier this week. It's now playing at the Quad here in New York and around the country. And presumably will be on Showtime maybe next year sometime.
We'll be there tonight for Q&A.
And they'll be there tonight. Tonight. Oh, tonight?
Tonight at the Quad.
Oh, it's tonight at the Quad, Q&A with Lauren and Per. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. And we'll see you next year.